Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Friday Feelings, where we turn emotions into power, vulnerability into strength, and remind you to feel everything, fear nothing, and transform your life. I'm your host, Jenelle Friday, and today's episode is a doozy because we are talking about the inner critic. And is your inner critic running the show, and what can you do about it? The reason today is so profound is because we all have an inner critic. Whether you call that voice imposter syndrome or you call that voice by a specific name, like someone I know, and talk to that inner critic directly. It's an inner voice that we all have, and I would say most of us struggle with, whether that's all the time or on occasion. And so I'm really excited to introduce my guest today, Miss Taylor Hodges. Taylor, thank you for your time today and just being willing to come and chat with me about this topic.
Thank you so much for inviting me to partner with you on this, Jenelle. It's very exciting. I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the years and really looking forward to speaking on this topic.
Yay, me too. So Taylor, you and I met at a Customer Success Collective event where I gave my first keynote and was the MC for that event. And you were also another speaker. So we sat on a panel together and just kind of got to share our love of customer success and the human to human connection. And clearly, those kinds of connections mean we're not just colleagues, right? We're building a friendship. And so I would love for you to just kind of give us and our audience a really quick background on you and what led you to want to talk about the inner critic with me today.
Sure. I have worked in customer service essentially my whole life. I began my career, I guess you could say, when I was 14 years old. I worked at Nordstrom, and working in the back doing inventory and stock. And then I was a cashier, and then I was a sales representative on the floor in the juniors department. It was very exciting, got me through high school with a little money in my pocket that I was able to save from when I wasn't buying all the clothes that I saw while I was working there. Then I worked in the service industry as a server and a bartender, which I think really gave me a lot of great experience in how to interact with people and understanding the human connection, and really just understanding just the human component of everything in life, right? It was a really great experience for me. Worked my way through school, and then when I was when I had graduated, ended up, having children and was a stay-at-home mom for a couple of years, and really wanted to get back into the workforce. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do, right? I have this degree, but I don't have any like true professional experience. There's a gap in my resume. That inner critic really came out during that time period in my life, I think, because I was, really afraid of what was next. And I didn't really think that I had anything to offer the world. Like, who's going to want to hire me? I don't have, the credentials or anything like that. But I ended up working for a very small consulting firm, wore many, many hats during that time, and really instilled in me a passion and love for technology. And so, worked there for several years, was able to gain some really great experience, some great connections. And then I came to JLL around 7 years ago, and, have really enjoyed my experience here. Started out as a customer success manager, and then now I am leading the customer success team for our Corrigo product.
That's amazing. I mean, what a journey through humble beginnings, right? I mean, man, do I remember Nordy's. It was always the place I went to get a pair of Doc Martens, right? That was
Oh,
kind of
yes.
the it place, or shoes for a dance like your daughter's got tonight,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, so I resonate with that really strongly. And so from the perspective of the inner critic, right? What is it about the inner critic for you that you resonate with that led you want to share with our listeners today about your journey through that?
I think the inner critic is such a powerful force, and I think that it really impacts, most people, right?
Yeah.
I read a book recently that was recommended by my manager called Positive Intelligence. It's written by Shirzad Kamine. And this book really resonated with me because it put labels around the inner critic that I hadn't really considered before. He calls this inner critic the judge, and this judge has complementary what he calls saboteurs, right? And that could be I'm a victim, or I'm avoiding things, or I'm going to be a stickler about things. I'm going to be a hyperachiever, a pleaser, all of these different components that make up the inner critic. And he has, we've got your judge brain and your sage brain. The judge brain is going to hold you back and prevent you from achieving your potential, right? Because it's going to be very critical of your actions, of your words, of your experiences, while your sage brain is going to encourage you to, create meaning and create a desire to contribute and, create curiosity and creativity and the joy and excitement of action, right? And so I read this book and I was like, wow, like this is, exactly what I've been feeling, but I didn't really know how to describe it, how to label it. I think, particularly for women, especially in the business world, a lot of times, we feel very challenged to use our voice and really be that creative, powerful force that we all know that we can be, just because we've been brought up to not be seen as aggressive or a B word or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I the imposter syndrome is huge, right? And I think everybody has experienced that at least once or twice in their life. And really just trying to understand, what impact am I going to have? What value do I create? And really trying to understand, why we're so critical of those perceived failures, whether they're real or not. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was a long-winded
Yeah.
answer, but
That was a good start. That was a great start. I think for me that inner critic is a default almost. I feel like sometimes it's easier to believe the bad stuff than it is to believe the good stuff, right? And when I really take this off of a business application and I look at it from a personal application and I start to really dig into, well, where did she come from? What were her root beginnings, right? When did I start to speak to myself so negatively? Young, right? It was young.
right.
And for me, that was because of a trauma that happened in my childhood I was not aware of until 2020. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a baseline identity. It was a baseline identity that I'd created, my subconscious had created, that was driving how I felt in my decisions and my actions. So I'm curious, when you talk about your inner critic, can you identify, if you remove it from your business life and you look at it from a personal perspective, how long do you think you've been fighting against that inner critic?
I mean, at a very young age as well. Didn't really experience trauma, but I found that through achievement was the way to get attention or acknowledgement or a feeling of self-worth,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
wasn't unless I achieved something that people would pay attention to me.
Yeah.
And so because of that, really strong need for that type of fulfillment, it was like, everything that I do is wrong. I'm never going to be good enough. I'm never really fit in, and, I was never popular enough. And I think, we all struggle with this, the society's views of perfection and all of that. And it's just it's an everyday struggle. And I think it
Yeah.
comes from, in your inner, when you're a child and trying to understand how to survive the
Yeah.
threats of life, right? And both
Mhm.
physical and emotional. And it helps you, it's an excuse for your brain to deal with that, but in a negative way, right? And it limits you from achieving your potential.
I agree. So let's get practical for a second. Is there a moment that you can think of where the inner critic won the battle? and you look back at that circumstance as, boy, that was a learning experience. That was the wrong decision. Why did I listen to that? Talk us through that.
Absolutely. So I was in a relationship for a very long time where my partner um, would call me an idiot, call me worthless. And so
Oh.
and it happened enough that I started believing that myself. And, it really quieted my voice, and it made me feel like I wasn't able to accomplish anything. I wasn't a good enough mother. I wasn't a good enough wife. I wasn't a good enough friend. Um,
Mhm.
and it really ate at my soul for a long time. And I just I put up with it for many years. And finally, one day, I'm like, I'm so desperately unhappy. And I came to the realization, I was like, I have to get out of this relationship. This is not healthy for me. It's not healthy for my children. And coming out of that, I have found a happiness that I've never felt before in my entire life. And
Mm.
it was that, and it wasn't a single moment where it was an aha, but it happened over time. And I think it took me getting to like rock bottom and being so desperately depressed that I had to save myself from it
Yeah.
and say, no, critic, no judge, you're not worthless, you're not an idiot, you deserve happiness. And making that choice was one of the most powerful moments of my life.
Well, first, I'm sorry you had to go through that. Being in a toxic relationship like that, you get caught up in that belief that if I leave, I'm never going to find anyone else.
Mhm.
You know, what if I'm alone the rest of my life? I definitely can resonate with that. So I'm curious, as you look back at that now, what are things that you've seen in your own life as a result of your bold and courageous decision to step out and pull yourself up, right? What lessons have you seen from that decision that stand true and are very strong within you today?
I mean, really just improving the relationships around me, particularly with my children. Not focused on the toxicity of that relationship, but being focused on the development and creating wonderful, kind humans and my children, and being very focused on that instead of the despair that I felt in that other relationship. I think
Yeah.
that's probably the most significant. It's also impacted me positively professionally. I've been able to excel and get promoted and all of that because I didn't have that inner critic holding me back. It gave me the courage to, ask for what I wanted and, get out there and take charge of my life.
I love that. I really love that because it's a choice, right? It's always a
Right.
choice. And I'm curious when we talk about the inner critic, we're also talking about self-compassion. And there's so much science on the back end that I could drop, which I'm not going to get too deep into. But there is evidence that the way we talk to ourselves internally, the things we listen to, the things that we believe and embrace have a massive impact of how we view ourselves and how we live our lives, right? So the science of self-compassion or the psychology behind it is that it's not the same as self-indulgence, excuse me, or complacency, right? That self-compassion and resilience and emotional intelligence are all tied together. And so I'm curious how you practice self-compassion when that inner critic is screaming at you, when you have a moment where the inner critic wins and you're like, "Oh, it got me again." Right? We have to go, "Oh shoot, okay, I'm not going to do that again," or "I'm having a rough day." We all have them. I'm human, right? What are you doing on a regular basis to kind of combat that inner critic?
I think the first step that you have to do is you have to label it. Like you have to be able to be self-aware enough to call it out when it happens.
Yes.
Shirzad talks a lot about that in the book Positive Intelligence, and he's like, give it a name, like it's the beast, or it's the witch, or whatever you want to call it, whatever's
Yep. Yep.
personal enough to you, and just say, oh nope, and push it away and
Yeah.
say, look, use that as an opportunity to pivot and say, how can I treat this situation by not talking myself down, or talking like having anxiety or resentment or guilt or shame about it, but how can I use this as an opportunity to learn and understand what I can do better next time, and what I can get out of this particular situation. Maybe you have a challenging call with a customer. I'll give a professional example.
Yeah.
You have a customer that says they're going to churn, and you get on you could be really upset about it, like, oh, I really worked hard on this customer, they've been with us a long time, like, woe is me, like this is going to be awful for me personally and the company. Or you can say, okay, what could we have done better with the account? Have an honest conversation with that customer, and maybe use it as an opportunity to pivot and just say, look, I recognize that maybe we fell short of your expectations, and possibly even recuperate the relationship with that customer, or just learn for the next time so that you have better engagements with your customers, um, moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, and that's so profound, right? Because so many of us, while we say we might not have a customer success label to our job titles, customer success is the responsibility of the entire organization, right?
1000%.
So it doesn't matter which position you hold if you're listening to this, in your role, especially in tech, how we engage customers, how we judge customers, how we interact with customers is a direct reflection of how we think about ourselves. Do you think that that's a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, first, does your inner critic have a name, Taylor?
I mean, right now it depends. It depends on the situation and which saboteur is coming out. Like yesterday, so I'm like crazy weird about like grammar and spelling and punctuation and stuff like that. And I was reading an email, and I'm like, you used, instead of weak, WEAK, they used WEEK. And I'm like, how can you be like that? Like, you're a professional, like this is ridiculous. And I'm like, there's my stickler that is creating these unnecessary expectations that somebody probably had a typo or just was going too fast or whatever. Like, it's not that big of a deal. But I was like, oh, like this is ridiculous. Like, so
And then
really
did you
just
come back
depending
down?
on
Did
the
you have a moment where
situation.
you're like, what am I doing?
Exactly. And because I was able to label it, I was like, you know what? It's not that big of a deal. This is not life and death here. Like, let's put this into perspective. And, maybe it's an opportunity to coach somebody on, making sure that they're taking the time to be more diligent about proofreading their emails. Like, did I have to get in a huff about it? No, but I did.
Yeah.
And, it's just like understanding, when I'm feeling like, oh, woe is me, our churn rate was so low. Like, I keep going back to customer success examples, but like,
Yeah.
how do you identify that and then pivot and improve moving forward?
Yeah, I love that.
Everything's an opportunity.
Yeah, one of mine that used to be a really big trigger is how people spell my name. It's everywhere in my email signature, on my LinkedIn profile. It's J-E,
Janell. Yeah.
Jenelle. Like, and I often tease my mom, I'm like, because Janelle wasn't weird enough 40 years ago, 40 plus years ago, you had to spell it weird. And you know what her response was? Well, I only wanted you to have one letter in your or vowel in your name so you could learn it easier. I'm like, but I'm pretty smart. Like, are you telling me I was
Interesting.
stupid? She's like, no, of course not. But like, it's,
But that's
I
your
mean,
inner
and to
critic.
this
Did you
day,
think I was going to be stupid?
right, right. Well, I mean, it's constant. To this day, it still happens. And it
Yeah.
used to get me, like, even my schools growing up couldn't get it right. It's been constant in my life. And as a professional, I look at responses and I'm like, It's the one thing I check with every email because I'm addressing you personally and I want to make sure I'm doing it correctly. And so it used to be a trigger. And now I'm at the point where when I self fill out an email and I start Jenelle, it auto corrects and puts it as JA because it's the most common spelling. And so
Yeah,
I've
interesting.
kind of let that trigger go, but I totally relate to little tiny things that you're like, why is this setting me off? This is so ridiculous. That inner critic that gets us all frantic over little things. When you step back and look at it, it's a little thing,
Tiny, tiny.
but that inner voice makes it a bigger deal. And to your point, identifying I recently had a guest on, Leah Russo, that talked about the feelings wheel. And I use it all the time because if you can't identify what you're feeling, and I'm not talking about I feel mad, I feel sad, right? There's a deeper meaning behind your emotions. And in those
Mhm.
emotions, in those moments where the inner critic is winning, to your point, identifying in the moment is sometimes, no, it's not sometimes, it's always the first step to overcoming. If you can't
Yes.
name it, it's going to be really hard to overcome it. And so, um, what are you actively saying to yourself? So give us some examples of statements that you're making, whether verbally out loud or in your mind when those moments happen, that you know help you get through those moments.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like it's go away. Like, get out of here. Like,
So simple.
slam the door
Take a
and
hike,
then leave.
Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back to Shirzad Kamine's book, but he says, really like take a moment and like harness your sage mind. And like if you're sitting in a chair, feel the weight of your body in the chair. If you're eating something, really taste the food, like really focus on the things that are around you and just take a moment. And what that does is it strengthens these muscles and creates different neural pathways in your brain so that you eventually create these habits to turn that judge brain or the inner critic or whatever you want to call it off and turn your sage brain on. And you become more at peace and you become more curious and more fulfilled and happier and all of those different things. But really just sitting there and saying, okay, I'm going to feel my feet on the floor. I'm going to feel the ridges of my fingertips. I'm going to smell the air around me. I'm going to feel the wind on my face and just really, I mean, it takes moments, seconds, but it's so profoundly impactful to just be present, recognize those feelings, and then be present in the moment. And all those worries and the anxiety and the fear will go away.
Yeah, you're really speaking to the 5 4 3 2 1 method, which is a grounding method, right? And we've talked about that on Friday Feelings before. So I'm curious, with all of the wisdom and all of the experience you have, you still hear the inner critic. How often would you say? Every day at some point?
Oh, multiple times a day, all day long. I mean, it's a journey. It's not, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a marathon, not a
Right,
sprint, right? I mean, this
right.
is it's your life. And so it it comes into play all of the time. And I think, I have something on my desk that says choose happy, right? So I can choose to wallow in self-pity or anxiety or guilt or regret, or I can decide to choose happy. And it is that choice. And I think it's just every moment and just practice making it a habit and just really turning it off. But it's something you can grow within for your entire life. It never
Yeah,
fully goes away. It's
yeah.
always going to be there, but you can strengthen your mind to combat it more effectively.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that you kind of talked about the neuroscience behind what's happening, right? Because your brain has been programmed. You have created an operating base program within the chemical makeup of your brain of how you process information, what that voice sounds like, and how you perceive yourself and the world around you has been preconditioned in your brain. And we're all different, right? And so,
Mhm.
in those moments, I often talk about how in order for real change to happen, you have to get out of your head And I love that you're talking about this grounding method that you do, or you're looking at a block that says choose happy, right? If
Hmm.
all you do is talk to yourself in your brain and you're telling this inner critic to go away and be quiet, but you're not taking it into a physical action to stop that um to stop that flow of thought, to interrupt it and to say something different, to embrace something different, then you're basically a victim to whenever that voice comes up, hoping that you're aware of it at the time before it bites you in the butt. You say something you shouldn't say, like I
Hmm.
have done on many occasions,
We
right?
all
So,
have.
I mean,
Who hasn't?
for me, it really, the revelation was getting out of my head because this is living with intention. This is living with purpose. This is realizing that every day you are going to face the inner critic, the voice that tells you you're not good enough, you can't, that's judgmental of others. And it has to be a conscious, self aware choice in those moments to choose differently. And so I want to shift us into actually actual strategies that are meant to quiet that inner critic. Like you said, Taylor, you're never going to get rid of it, but we can quiet it and we can
Hmm.
start to cement beliefs, core beliefs and choices into how we think about ourselves and others and the life that we're living, right? So let's talk about a couple of strategies or methods that you have found helpful in your own battle with the inner critic.
Sure. I mean, I think it's, challenging that negative self-talk, right? Like ask yourself, like, would I talk to a friend like this? Like,
Yeah.
why would I speak to myself in a way that I wouldn't speak to another person? Like, why am I so little self-worth that, that I would do that to myself. I'm a very visual person. I like to read a lot. You actually gave this to me at the Customer Success Collective conference. I have it on my desk right next to my choose happy sign. And if I need like some words of affirmation for myself, you have within you right now everything you need to deal with whatever the world can throw at you. This is a quote from Brian Tracy. I mean, having that front and center where I sit, where I have my day all the time, you know, seeing those words. I also have a bracelet that says keep going, right? Like
Love
that is
that.
really has been really impactful for me. And then also just like we mentioned before, like just taking a break. Like you can take 5 seconds or 10 seconds or a couple minutes out of your day and just have some self-compassion. Remind yourself that this part of the human experience, right? Reflect on a time where you felt good about yourself. Like I just had lunch with somebody that I hadn't seen in 10 years. And it was a wonderful experience. And he's like, "Oh, I'm not surprised you're successful." My inner critic says, "Well, why would you think that? I didn't feel like I was worthy." And then I'm like, "What am I doing? Like, of course I work really hard." Like all of these different things. So it's just reflect on like something like that, like a comment that somebody gave you that was a positive affirmation of
Yeah.
who you are and what you
Yeah.
do.
I love that. I've got a friend who, when the inner critic makes a comment, you're unworthy, you're stupid, you're right, whatever, she writes it down. And so then she goes back through this journal where she's written down all of these comments and she's like, that's not true. And she counter writes out a different thought. And so again, it's that visual representation to really look at how often, what's being said, why do I say those things to myself? And I love your comment of, if I'm willing to speak to myself horribly in a way that I would never speak to someone else, it shows the value I have of my own being. And
Right.
one of the things I do when I'm facing that inner critic, and I think I've talked about this before, but I have three questions I ask myself. The first one, is it true? So for sake of a better example, the inner critic that says you're not good enough for the job, for your spouse, for whatever, you're not good enough. My first question is it true? Is that statement really true at its core that I'm not good enough? That absolutely not. I have multiple people that can tell me that I am good enough and that I'm loved, right?
Yeah.
Two, is it helpful? Is it helpful in this moment to be criticizing myself or others when it's probably in the midst of something I'm working on, a conversation I'm having? It's probably not while I'm just sitting by myself with nothing to do. It's probably happening in a moment that I need to be kind to myself specifically, right? And then
Mhm.
three, is it kind? To your point, am I speaking to myself kindly in a way that I would speak to someone else who is struggling with that same thing? And especially in my role now, as I'm talking to people all the time about emotional intelligence, it's like all the advice that I give and the encouragement and the cheerleading, all like when I have moments where I'm so mean to myself, I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
That should
exactly.
be talking like this to yourself, which just is more proof that to live is to be human, to feel is to be human. And there's no easy fix. There is no one size fits all. And so, you can use guided affirmations, you can create new habits to reinforce self-compassion, writing out things, whether you're a journalist and you journal or you write things down. I have a gratitude journal that I love because it keeps my mind in the morning focused on positive. You can't complain or be sad when you're being grateful. I've learned that lesson. Um, so as we wrap, Taylor, I really, if there's someone listening to this podcast that's like, oh my gosh, I totally resonate, Taylor, with what you're talking about, but I'm not really sure what I need or what's going to work for me or where to start. What advice can you offer?
I mean, really go out and buy the book Positive Intelligence, number one. This guy is unbelievable. Like, I've been so fascinated with this book and it's been so powerful to me. Highly recommend. There's a website, just positiveintelligence.com, that you can go look at. I mean, he does coaching and classes, and but read the book, learn how to label those saboteurs, that inner critic, that judge, and learn how to strengthen your sage brain, as he
I love
says.
that. I love that. And again, I'm so grateful for your time with us today. Where can people connect with you if they'd like to continue the conversation or get to know you more?
Oh, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a note, shoot me a message. I love to meet new people and learn about your journey and everything that you're working towards. So please don't hesitate. Taylor Hodges. I believe if you just go to linkedin.com/Taylor Hodges, uh, you can connect with me. I'd be
I
happy
love
to.
that. And for myself, just as we wrap today's episode, this is a topic that I feel like we could talk about forever because I think every adult on the planet, and maybe teenagers, can can relate because again, this is an inner critic that's part of the human condition. And we don't talk about it enough because we all want to seem like we're put together, right? But I think we can all acknowledge as well that we live in a very tumultuous climate, politically, emotionally, spiritually. We're told on a regular basis we're not enough, we're not rich enough, we're not thin enough, we're not pretty enough. We need a bigger, better car, a bigger, better house, right? Those messages have planted this insecure person within us that struggles. And in those struggles, the one thing I want to remind everybody is to be real with yourself, to understand that that is part of the human condition. You're not broken, you're not wrong, you're not, terrible for thinking those things. And I guarantee you the person sitting next to you is going through the same thing in their own way, in their own circumstances. But that's also an encouragement for us to practice empathy and kindness. That sometimes when someone says something or they look at you with a certain face and we make assumptions about that interaction or about that person, and the inner critic comes out so strong, like misspelling a name or mistyping a word week or
Yeah.
week, that to err on the side of positive intent and empathy and kindness for the person on the other side. We need more of that. And so I think today's message too, Taylor, I think you can agree with me. We need more empathy and compassion for the people that tweak and irk our inner critic too. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's not just an inside voice, it's an outside voice as
It
well. And
is. Yeah.
definitely need to practice empathy. The world would be such a better place if we all had a little bit more empathy.
100%. I agree. It's been a pleasure, Taylor. Thank you so much for your time again and for sharing with us.
Thank you so much, Jenelle.
Yeah. All right. Well, as I wrap today's episode, I'm going to encourage you always to be inspired to feel deeply, even if those feelings are addressing your inner critic and facing difficult comments that you find yourself saying to yourself all the time, to live fearlessly, to not be afraid of that inner critic or that inner voice, but to address it head on and know that you have the ability to quiet it, to overcome it, and to embrace a positive mental acceptance and purpose-filled life and to live authentically. Because without authenticity, you're covering up a bigger issue. And quite frankly, we all know that if you bury it and ignore it, it's going to pop out somewhere where you least expect it and probably going to do some harm along the way. So live authentically and be real with your emotions and keep leaning into your feelings because that's where transformation starts from within. I'll see you guys next Friday.